hopefully a lot of those you guys aren't aware of, and hopefully I teach you guys some new things today. Make sure if you have any questions, just feel free to interrupt me at any time, whether you want to ask the question or type it into the chat. So I'll make sure I periodically check the chat throughout. But yeah, definitely don't be afraid to ask questions, ask me to clarify anything, if you want me to repeat anything, if you think I'm going too fast. So as I said, I'll just wait 1 or 2 more minutes just for any last few people to join, and then we'll get things underway.
Sorry, Stephen, we're getting a repeat from your other screen, I think.
Repeat?
Yeah.
Whereabouts are we talking about? Sorry?
Yeah, that's working.
I'm hearing an echo of myself.
That's not coming from me. Everything's muted here.
One, two, three. Let's test that. Can you hear that?
I can hear you here, Michelle. Fine.
Okay. All right. No, it's still there. Might have to put something on a mute somewhere, I think. Sorry, Stephen.
Yeah, I agree with Alan. I can't hear any echo or anything on my end.
I'm okay as well.
All right, I think we'll give it 1 more minute. And also one more thing, make sure you guys kind of periodically check the chat yourselves as well, because I'll be posting a few useful links throughout the talk as I go along. So I'll let you guys know exactly when I post certain links. And also one more thing, make sure you guys kind of periodically check the chat yourselves as well, because I'll be posting a few useful links throughout the talk. All right, I think we'll probably get things underway. So I'll start sharing my screen. All right, just make sure everyone can see that. So just sing out if you can't see my screen. No? Excellent. Okay, so pretty much what I thought I'd start with is uploading observations, given that's the primary activity that most people do when they're on iNaturalist. So, and I get just to keep in mind that all the stuff I'm going to be going through today is based on the desktop version of iNaturalist. Of course, there's the app as well, but all of the stuff I'm going to go through today is using iNaturalist on the computer. So whenever you want to upload, you just go to the big green upload button at the top right corner of the screen. And once you click that, you'll be taken to this screen. And you've actually got 2 options once you're here. One option is to click the big blue button, which says choose files, which will then take you to folders on your computer. And you can browse through all of your photos and pick the ones you want. Alternatively, you can actually have the folder on your computer that has your photos already open, and you can actually just physically drag photos from that folder into the iNaturalist screen. But I tend to find that a little bit cumbersome and a little bit clunky to do. So I much prefer to do it the usual way with the big blue button. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pick some photos that we'll use as samples. So we'll pick these. So select all the photos you want and press open, and they'll all appear. Now, keep in mind, a lot of cameras nowadays, a lot of DSLR cameras don't have GPS on them. So a lot of the time when you're uploading photos, they won't have location data. Now, some cameras do. For example, if anyone has any of the TG Olympus Tough series, any of the small pocket cameras that are used by a lot of divers and underwater photographers, that generally has GPS attached to it. But really, any large camera, most of the cameras that people use for taking photos of birds and plants, they tend to not have a GPS. So you need to fill in the location data manually. So for any photo where you want to include the location, just click the location bar here on one of the observations, and this will take you to a Google Maps screen. Now, again, there's multiple ways of doing things. If you know exactly where you are on the map, you can actually just scroll in and out, and you can drag your map around and go to the place you want. But generally, the map will start at a very zoomed out version like this. And it can, again, it's just a lot of the tips I'm going to talk to you guys today about are just about increasing the efficiency of how you use iNaturalist. So scrolling all the way in on the spot where you took the photos can be really time consuming. So what you do is you just go up here into the search bar, and just like you would on any kind of Google Map search or any kind of mapping app, you just type in the location of where you took these photos, and you should get an option come up. And then once you've gone in, you can zoom in, and wherever you click initially, that's going to be the center, the node of your location. And you'll notice this red circle appears around that point. And that's the accuracy circle. So by clicking on the edge, any of the edges of that circle, you increase the accuracy radius of your observation. And what that does is you're basically saying, I saw this organism somewhere inside this circle. So if you know the exact point where you saw something, you know, for example, if you, so I took these photos inside my house, and I know that I took them in the living room, and I know that they were at this exact spot. So I can just click there, and I don't have to change the accuracy circle whatsoever. Whereas, let's say I took these photos 5 years ago around my house, and I have zero recollection of exactly where I took it. What I'll do is I'll increase that accuracy circle until it covers all of my house, and just place the circle directly over the top of the house. So now anyone that sees that observation knows that your photo was taken somewhere inside that circle. Okay, so that's a really nice way of doing things when you went for a bushwalk and you walked along a lot of trails, and you can't remember exactly where you took your photos, but you have a rough idea. So you just set up your accuracy circle to cover all the possibilities. Now you can manually set any of these things as well. So as well as clicking on the map and doing these things, you can type the latitude and longitude if you know it down here. So, if you went on a trip and you kept a really detailed travel journal and you noted latitude and longitude of where you'd been, you can manually type in the latitude and longitude. Just remember it's in decimal degrees, not in degrees, minutes, seconds. And you can also manually adjust the accuracy as well. Then you have these three options for geoprivacy, and these are really important. So the default option for geoprivacy when you're uploading observations is open. And what open means is that anyone can view your observation and see the exact coordinates where you took those photos. Absolutely anyone. And that's the default, as I said. The second option is obscured. And what happens with obscured observations is whatever coordinates you enter, they get randomly scrambled into a box that is 0.2 degrees of latitude wide, and I should say longitude wide, and 0.2 degrees of latitude high, which ends up roughly being a 400 square kilometer box. But that does change where you are because we're on a globe, not a flat surface. But it basically randomly scrambles the true coordinates into this big 400 square kilometer box. You'll still be able to see your own coordinates, but anyone else looking in will see a random location. Now, you can obscure observations manually. So say, for example, you saw a rare orchid and you didn't want people to see your observation, be able to go and potentially collect it or poach it. So what you can do is you can obscure that location. And then so if you get any orchid poachers on iNaturalist trying to find exact locations, all they'll see is that, well, it's somewhere in this massive box. And so it's not that helpful to them. For some observations, however, they're automatically obscured by iNaturalist itself, and you can't change that. And that happens for anything that has a conservation status of near threatened or above. So anytime you take a photo of a species that's near threatened, vulnerable, endangered, or critically endangered, its location is automatically obscured into that big box, and you have no control over that. And as you would guess, the reason for that is to not necessarily prevent, but to reduce the chances of people poaching or collecting those organisms. The final geoprivacy option is private. Now, I tend to recommend against using private, but there are some kind of niche cases where you can use it. The reason I recommend against using private is that it completely removes the location from your observation. So not only can you not see the coordinates, you can't even tell what continent it was taken on. Not only that, because it has no location, it means that in most cases, it doesn't turn up in all the usual searches. So a lot of new users will mistakenly set their observations to private, not realizing what it actually does. And then their observations end up being unsearchable by other people. And so they're sitting there kind of waiting for IDs on their observations, wondering why people aren't helping them out. And it's because no one can see their observations. But there are two general, the main reasons, I guess, why people would want to set things to private. One is if you don't want to reveal the location of your house or even the general area where you live. So if you've taken photos in your house around your neighborhood and you don't want people to have that information, that's completely fine. And so some people will set things to private. But as I said, others won't be able to see those observations and help identify them for you. So in those cases, obscuration can be a much better strategy. The other reason, the other situation where you might want to set observations to private is, say you found this super, super rare orchid and it's only found in this specific habitat type. And the place where you found it, there's only a really tiny patch of that habitat type for kilometers and kilometers and kilometers. Well, obviously, if you obscure that location and people look at that big box, and within that big box, even though the location is random, there's only one tiny patch in there where that orchid could possibly be found based on its habitat requirements, then those poachers can obviously still figure out where it is. So private, it can generally be used for these really, really niche cases where even if the location were to be obscured, poachers or collectors could still easily intuit where that observation is. So does that make sense to everyone? I'll always take the silence as a yes. So if something doesn't make sense, sing out. Otherwise, I'll assume everyone, it's all good and all clear. So as I said, most cases, open geoprivacy is the best option to go. And then you just press, we've got one question in the chat. All good, sweet. So then you always just make sure you press update observations, just so it saves. And then I now have a location for there. But what happens if I've taken 10 photos all at the same place, right? I don't want to have to manually set that location 10 times. So if I've got all of these photos and they're all from the same location, all you have to do is tick this select all button, and then you go over to the left-hand side and you do the same thing. And whatever location I set, so let's say I set the location here, you'll now notice that all of them have location information. And you can do the exact same thing for the date, for the species name, for description, for tags, you name it. Any kind of data that you are entering and attaching to these photos, you can do it for all of these observations at once. And not only that, let's say you only want to do it for 4. So let's say I took these top 3 photos at the same location, and then these bottom 5 at a different location. All I have to do is click the first one, and then while holding down the shift button, click on the others, and they'll all be selected at the same time. Now, you hold down the shift button if the 3 are consecutive. But let's say I want to get this one, and this one. Instead, I'll hold down the control button, and I can click photos out of order. Does that make sense to everyone? So if you've got multiple photos that are all next to each other, and you want to select all of them, you just hold down the shift button and then click each one. Whereas if you've got photos scattered all over the place and they're not necessarily sitting next to each other, you hold down the control button and select each one. Now, a lot of the time, you'll take photos of an organism and you'll take multiple photos of the same thing. Now, those should always be submitted as one observation rather than multiple observations. So here, I've got 5 photos of this spider. So I should submit them all as one observation, not as 5 separate observations. And the way you do that is you can just physically drag them on top of each other. So the first step is to pick which one you want to appear first. So make sure you make that choice. And generally the one you want to appear first should be the photo you like the best, the clearest photo, the one that you think shows all of the features that are needed for ID. So let's say I pick this photo and I want to have this one appear first. What I do is I get all the other photos that are of the same spider and I physically pick them up with my mouse and drag them onto that other one, and it combines them. So pick up the next one, drag it on, and it combines. And I do that for all the photos. So now I can do the same for these cockroaches. So I pick up the observation, drag it, pick it up, drag it. So I had 8 photos, but now I've only got 2 observations because I had 5 photos of the same thing and 3 photos of the same thing. Alternatively, if you didn't want to drag them, you can just select multiple photos and you can click this combine button up here. It does the same thing, but just generally the dragging tends to be a little bit faster. Now, you can add any of your observations to projects. So every time you join a project, they'll appear in this menu. So these are all the projects that I'm a part of. And projects are a really great way of becoming part of a community on iNaturalist and finding people who have similar interests, as well as helping contribute to science and research. So a project that at least the Australian people here will know about, probably all of you will have contributed at some point, is Australasian fishes. So that's a big project that covers all of Australia and New Zealand. And anytime you see a fish or a shark or a ray in Australian or New Zealand waters, you can add it to that project. Now, projects like that require you to manually add your observations. So if I were to, pretending this is a fish, I would click on that, and then I'd go to projects on the side, and then I would add it to Australasian fishes here, and I'll click that. But then there are other projects that automatically collect your observations for you, and you don't have to add them at all. And the Great Southern BioBlitz is an example of one of those. So as long as you make your observations sometime between the 25th and the 28th of September, and as long as that observation falls within the area that you've set to be your city or region, it will get automatically collected by the observation. So you don't have to do anything. All you have to do is take the photo and upload it, and it will automatically be counted towards the project. One thing I will note, and it's really important for these kind of projects, is you have to be careful with your accuracy circle, and I'll explain why. So I'll actually bring up another page that will help me show this a little clearer. So if I type in the place Greater Sydney, so that's where I'm from, and that's where I'm going to be competing for the Great Southern BioBlitz, I can go to the map, and I can see this is the exact area that is covered by Greater Sydney. So any observations during the Great Southern BioBlitz, for anyone that's in Greater Sydney and wants to have their observations counted towards the project, their observations have to be somewhere inside this polygon. Now, the thing is, let's say I'm one of these observations that's right on the edge. If I observe something that's right on the edge of the area, and I set my accuracy circle to be outside this polygon, it will not be included in the project. So that's a really, really important thing. So if I take a photo of something in Greater Sydney and I'm like right in the middle here, then my accuracy circle can be pretty big because there's a lot of leeway. But you know, if the place that you have created and your city or region is quite small, whether it's really narrow or it's really short, and your observation is near one of the edges of the place, make sure that you set the accuracy circle to be really small. And this is not just for this project, but any kind of collection project on iNaturalist that automatically collects your observations. If the accuracy circle moves outside the borders of the place, it doesn't matter if the point you clicked is inside. If the accuracy circle leaves the place at all, then it will not be included in that project or in that place. Just get a question. Do details on the front image of a combined bundle populate all other images in the bundle? Yeah, really great question, Alan. Yeah, so if I had these 5 spider photos and I combined all the other photos into the top one, then yes, all of the details that were on that first photo will populate the other ones. So normally, if I take 5 photos of a bird, they're all going to be within a few seconds of each other. But if I'm taking photos of something over, say, 5 or 10 minutes, then do note that whatever photo you pick first, whatever time you took that photo at, then that's going to show the same time for the other photos. So that's just something to be aware of. And a really cool feature as well is, let's say I took 5 photos with my camera that has a GPS, and for some reason, there's some kind of bug or a tree blocked the signal. 4 of the photos have no location data, but the 5th photo, the GPS managed to pick up a location. If I combine those 5 photos, it doesn't matter whether that one that has the location is the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, or 5th. It'll add that metadata to all of the photos. So pretty much when you're combining multiple photos, it will consolidate the date and the location data for you. But yeah, so the ultimate take-home message from that is just, if you're taking photos of something and you know that you're right on the edge of your place that you're competing in, just set that accuracy circle to be small, just in case it goes over the edge. And then the final aspect of uploading your observations is putting in an ID. Now, even if you have no idea what something is, it's really important to put at least some kind of ID, even if it's something as simple as plants. I do that all the time. Because if you upload observations that don't have an ID, it makes it harder for people to find them and for people to identify it for you. So the reason for that is that a lot of people will specifically search for certain taxa. So some people are experts in birds and they don't really care about the other organisms that are uploaded to iNaturalist. So for those people, they'll go into iNaturalist and they put into their filters, they might put in a place, let's say they type in Australia, and then they type birds. So they'll only see birds. And if you've uploaded a photo of a bird, but you haven't put any ID in, then they won't see it. So let's say I take a photo of this spider and I have no idea what it is, right? But I know it's a spider. Then it is completely fine, and in fact, very much encouraged to just put in that ID, even if you think it's really basic, because it means that anyone searching for spiders will immediately see your observation and be able to identify it for you. But of course, if you know what it is, then by all means, type in the identity. So this one is a Rufous netcasting spider. And if you know what it is, you type in the ID. But it's always better to put at least some ID rather than leave it blank. So Margot asked, is it best to add that information to the tags? Yeah, but by all means, you can add it to the tags as well. So as well as identifying things, there's this tab here, tags. And the way tags works is people can search for a word or keyword, and your observation will turn up in that search, even if it's not a particular species. So just to clarify that, so let's say I take a photo of a bird and I only know that it's a bird. I have no clue what species it is. So I add my ID of birds, but then just to help people that might be searching for things more specific, I could type in other things. So let's say it was yellow. I could add yellow bird as a tag. And now anyone searching for the phrase yellow bird will see your observation turn up. Now, obviously, there probably are very, very few, if any, people searching for the phrase yellow bird. But adding these tags can be helpful for people finding observations. An example where it could be particularly helpful is, say you've taken a photo of a really cool caterpillar and you have no idea whether it'll turn into a butterfly or a moth. So you just add an ID of Lepidoptera. You could add the tag caterpillar. So then people that are searching for caterpillars will see your observation. But by no means are tags necessary. So you don't feel obliged to enter tags, but they can be really helpful for getting people to find your things easier. I'll just very briefly, as the last observation thing, talk about the AI. So as most of you will probably know, if you click in the species bar, iNaturalist will suggest 10 different IDs based on the visual similarity of the photo to its training data. So basically how this works is iNaturalist has this big set of training data that it feeds in. So every time you're taking observations, making observations and taking photos of things, you are helping train the computer vision of iNaturalist to get better at recognizing photos. The thing is, the computer vision gets better the more photos it has. So for things like birds, it's really, really great. if I upload a photo of a bird, even if it's a blurry or a crappy photo, 95% of the time, it will be able to identify it for you. And a big reason for that is that so many people have uploaded photos of birds of all kinds of different qualities from all kinds of different angles, that the computer vision has become really good at being able to differentiate and identify those birds, which makes sense, right? The same thing would work for a human. If you saw thousands and thousands of photos of different birds and you got to recognize what they look like from different angles, then you would become a lot better at identifying them. Whereas if you're uploading photos of invertebrates, particularly in the Southern Hemisphere, because there are a lot more iNaturalist users in the Northern Hemisphere, then the computer vision isn't so good. And that's because it doesn't have enough data. So for a lot of obscure bugs and spiders and mollusks, always take the computer vision suggestions with a grain of salt, okay? And a really important thing to do is always check the distribution range. So a lot of the time in the Southern Hemisphere, when you upload photos of invertebrates, a lot of the suggestions that the computer vision makes will be North American or Northern Hemisphere species. So let's say I've asked for the computer vision suggestions here, and I'm scrolling down and I think, okay, my picture looks a lot like this yellow line arrow crab. The next step to do is click View. That'll open a new tab, and you need to check the distribution. So I check the distribution and I say, okay, well, it's largely a Central and Southern American species. So given I took my photo in Australia, it's probably not that. Okay, and that's a really nice way just to check the data. So if you ever intend to use these computer vision suggestions, and it's not a really obvious species like a pigeon or something like that, always check the distribution just to make sure that it is possible that that thing occurs. So for example, I might then say, okay, well, it's probably not that one since that's an American species. It does look like this Rufous net casting spider. Let's check that. So it brings up the distribution. And you can see that it's pretty much exclusively found in Australia, apart from this one over here, which is an obvious wrong record. So I might just bring that up and have that there for later. I'll fix that one up. But you can see that it's found in Australia. So just because it's found in Australia doesn't necessarily mean it's correct, right? But it means that it is a possibility as opposed to it not being found in Australia at all. So in this case, I know that that is the correct species, so I can select it. And the same thing goes for here. This one, it knows what it is, a German cockroach. And again, that's because so you have two different situations here where the computer vision was correct. In the case of the German cockroach, it's a very widespread species across the globe pretty much. So heaps and heaps of people have uploaded photos of German cockroaches, so the computer vision has gotten good at recognizing it. In the case of the Rufous net casting spider, it's the same thing. It's a really common spider throughout most of Australia, so lots and lots of people have uploaded photos of it, so the computer vision has gotten pretty good at recognizing it. And then once you're done with your observations, you just click Submit to Observations up here, and your observations will be uploaded. Okay, yeah, so Stephen's just asked me a question, and he said, okay, so Stephen has said, I have a question about placeholder IDs. So these are from the YouTube stream, actually. All right, awesome. So the first one is, I have a question about placeholder IDs. Sometimes users use them because they know the species or subspecies, but it's not available on iNaturalist yet. Okay, so that's a really great question. So to answer that one first. So yeah, iNaturalist is pretty good in that it has a lot of species, but not every species is in iNaturalist. And that makes sense because there are an absurd number of species throughout the world. And a lot of them are these really obscure and esoteric things that, half of them people have never seen before, or there might be like one photo in existence. So a lot of those ones aren't in iNaturalist yet. So let's say I know exactly what it is. So let's say this is a really rare spider, and it's Spiderus. And I know that that is the species name, but it doesn't turn up, okay? The first step there is to click this little button that says Search External Name Providers. So if you click that, iNaturalist will actually do a quick search of a whole lot of external databases that it's linked to. So that's things like Australian Faunal Directory, Bug Guide, fungi, some of the fungi ones whose name escaped me, but it will search. Encyclopedia of Life is another one. So there are a whole lot of external biodiversity databases, and iNaturalist will search those, right? But sometimes it still can't find them. And in those cases, it'll say no results found. And if I try to upload an observation so another really important thing, just as a very brief segue, if I type in the name exactly and I know what it is, that's not enough, okay? You still have to actually click the option that appears. So the reason that that's relevant is if I know this is the name, and that's the species name, but then no options appear, and then I submit my observation with that placeholder, it will have no ID. And what it will do, as the question asks, it'll appear as a placeholder ID. So what that means is that the observation will be unknown. Actually, what I might do is even though I've submitted this observation, I might just put this in just to demonstrate this to you guys. It will have no ID. And what it will do, as the question asks, it will appear as a placeholder ID. So what that means is that the observation will be, and I'll submit that. And I'll just delete the observation. Even though I've submitted this observation, I might just put this in just to demonstrate this to you guys. Okay, so I have this placeholder ID. So you'll see that the overall ID is unknown, but then there's this placeholder, okay? And sometimes that'll say no results found if you click that option, but a lot of times this placeholder will say that species name that hasn't been entered into iNaturalist yet. Now, if you are going around and identifying things for people, it's really important to take note of what that is, because once you add an ID, that placeholder ID will be lost and there is no way to retrieve it. So I'll show you exactly what happens. So if I now add in an ID of spiders, watch what happens to the placeholder ID. It disappears and there's no way to retrieve it. So if you're going around and you're identifying things for people and you notice that there was a placeholder ID there, this is the best practice. You make your ID, but before you make it, you add a comment on your ID and just note what the placeholder was, and that way it's still preserved. And that also has the benefit of if a curator comes along and sees that, they can say, okay, obviously this person knows what the observation is, knows what the species is. This species isn't in iNaturalist yet. I'm going to go add it for them. Keep in mind that's not always the case. Sometimes the reason that a placeholder is there is because you misspelt the name. Okay. That's a really important thing. When you're typing in a species name or a common name, it has to be spelt perfectly correctly. Otherwise, iNaturalist won't recognize it. So let me just get to those other questions in the chat. Okay, so someone said they're not visible in the app as far as I'm aware. Okay, so I pretty much answered the next question. So the next question was, placeholders are not visible in the app as far as I'm aware. I believe that is correct. So unfortunately, the iNaturalist app has a lot less functionality than iNaturalist on the desktop. So I pretty much only use the iNaturalist app if I'm out in the field and if I'm taking photos of plants really quickly with my phone. Apart from that, I'll never use the app because the desktop just has so many more features. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind. And then the other question was, is it bad to suggest an ID over a placeholder? Is that placeholder still retained somewhere? So as I said, no, that placeholder is not retained. It gets destroyed, but it's not a bad thing to suggest an ID. It's actually a good thing because it moves your observation out of that unknown pool and lets people find it, as I mentioned earlier. But the caveat to that is if you are suggesting an ID when someone has a placeholder, make sure you type that placeholder for them as a comment. It's just a really nice common courtesy thing to do so that it doesn't get lost. Then we had another question. Do you recommend entering interactions where you have species preying on each other? It's a fairly convoluted process from what I can gather. So yeah, adding interactions is a really cool thing to do. and it's a really nice way of helping out people that might be searching for those interactions. And it can be a little bit difficult. So I'll show you one way to do it. So if I go to one of my observations, and I can show you how to include interactions. So I'll actually find one that has an interaction. Okay, I'll search for one. Okay, so here's an example. So here's a photo I took of Mamatia nigricincta, which is a type of bull ant, feeding on a seed bug, Nicias species. Okay, so what I can actually do is I can go down once I've uploaded the observation, and I can enter one of these observation fields. So whenever you want to add extra information about your observations, whether it's to do with the habitat that you saw them in, whether it's some kind of interaction you observed, whether you want to note that, say, there was a trace of an organism. So let's say you took a photo of a feather and you wanted to note that it was a primary feather or a secondary feather. Anytime you want to include extra information, you add one of these observation fields. And there are 1,000,001 observation fields to choose from. There's a big list that you can search separately, but basically you just start to type and it'll start to give you options. So here, and there are a lot of duplicate ones. So it should be easy to find what you want. So let's say I want to type predator. And here we go, predating. So I've found a predating one. And I type in Nicias. Actually, this is probably not the best one. I'll add preying on. Preying on. So then I can go preying on Nicias. Add. So I've now added an interaction annotation to this observation. So now people can actually search for observations where Nicias is a prey item, and they'll find this. Now, I also duplicated this observation for the ant itself. Actually, yeah, I've done it around the wrong way. So pretend this observation was for the ant. Then this would be the correct one. But since this observation is for the prey, then I would actually... I just have to remove this observation field. Or delete. So yeah, if you add an incorrect observation field, you can easily click delete. So because this one is of the prey, and I actually need to type in preyed on. Interaction preyed on. So yeah, there are a lot of really similar ones. So that's, as Grant noted, is convoluted. So, and it's always important to read the description. But yeah, so there are a lot of convoluted ones that you can add, but it's just about choosing the right one. So if this was my photo for the ant, then I would choose predator as the option. Another way of doing things is just to post a link in the description. So if I go to, I'll get my actual observation of the ant. And when did I see this? September 10, 2019. Okay, so see, I have the exact same observation for both the ant and for the prey. So what I can do is I can just copy the link for the prey, go to my observation of the ant, I click edit, go to the description, and I can add in that link. So now if anyone goes to my ant observation, they can see that this is the observation for the prey. There's another way to do it as well. It's another observation field. Is it link? Yeah, linked observation. So here we go. So this is another way to do it. So you pick the observation field called linked observation, and you enter the URL, and it's now linked. So that's another way to do it. So those are ways of setting up observation fields for interactions between different observations. Awesome. I'm glad that was clear. But yeah, and as I said, not only are there 1,000,001 observation fields that already exist, but you can actually manually make your own observation fields as well. But it's almost never worth making your own fields unless it's something incredibly specific that's not been done before. because in 99.9% of the cases, someone else has thought of that observation field before you, and they've done the job for you. One last thing I'll note is that when you're uploading observations, it doesn't just have to be photos. You can also upload sound files. Now, you can do that from the Android app directly, but if you have an iPhone, it actually doesn't let you upload sound files via the app. So if you've taken sound recordings with your phone and you have an iPhone, you'll have to download the sound file, the video, from your phone onto your computer. What I will post a link for you guys is so this is a really nice conversion site that I use. It's free to use. There is a limit in terms of the megabytes you can do each day, but I rarely exceed it. I'm just going to post this into the chat. Okay, so that's the link. Yeah, so a good testimonial from Margot said easy to use, used it on the weekend. So pretty much if you take a video with your phone, it will generally be in the form of an MP4. So you can directly convert it to an M4A, and then that's what you upload to iNaturalist. So iNaturalist doesn't accept video. An MP4 is a video format. So you have to convert it to an M4A, which is a sound file only, and then you can upload it to iNaturalist. Alternatively, if you have taken a video with your camera, it will actually usually be in the format MOV. And in order to convert that, I would advise against directly converting from MOV to M4A. When I've tried it in the past, it tended to go a bit haywire and not work. So what you need to do is convert MOV to MP4 and then MP4 to M4A. So it's a little bit annoying to have that extra step in the middle, but that's what tends to work best for me, I've found. So now I've covered observing. I'll briefly cover how to identify your own things. So let's say you've uploaded your observations and you had no idea what they were. So I'll go to one of my recent ones that I'm not sure about. Okay, we'll go to this one. So this is a spider I found in my house yesterday. And I know it's in the family Nephosidae, and this is a bad example to use, but because Nephosidae is a really poorly understood family in Australia, and there are many, many undescribed species, but I'll use this as an example. So let's say I know that this is the family Nephosidae, but I want to try and figure out what genus or species it is. What I'll do is I'll go to this search bar up here, and I'll type in Nephosidae. And you don't have to type the whole thing, it'll start to autocomplete, and I click View Observations. This is now showing me all of the observations of that family in the entire world on iNaturalist. So obviously I'm not interested in the species that are seen in other countries because it's unlikely that it was the same one as mine. So I'll set it to Australia. So you can set the place and you can set the group. And I can see, okay, well, there's only 7 species that have been observed so far, or at least 7 identified species. So what I can do is I click on that species tab, and I can now see the 7 different species. And looking at these and then looking back at mine, well, none of them really match, right? And so you say, okay, well, that's not really helpful so far. So let's narrow it down further, and let's go New South Wales where I saw it. And now you see that it's only one of 18 observations. So now that's few enough for me to actually manually scroll through. So these are all the other observations that people have taken of this family of spiders in New South Wales. And I can see that it doesn't match anything. So this is why I said it was a bad example, because I know that it didn't match. But this is how you go about finding things. So I'll give another example, one where I know we'll be able to find it. Let's pick an easy one. Okay, let's pick this one. So let's say I uploaded this and I knew the family, Naritae, but I didn't know the species. Okay, let's say I just knew the family. What I'll do is I'll do the exact same process. I'll type in the family Naritae, and I'll keep it in New South Wales. and I'll see that there are 9 species. And okay, I'll say, okay, let's have a look. Immediately you can see that there are ones you can eliminate, right? So we're looking back at this photo I've taken. We can say, okay, we can eliminate this one. It's got these really distinct ridges. We can eliminate this one, distinct ridges. Same for this and this. So that leaves us with these options. Right? And then you can start to look at the patterns. And you say, okay, well, it's probably not that, not this, not this. And this is a really simplified version of doing things. But ultimately you can say, okay, this looks pretty good. Looks pretty close. So it's probably going to be that. And so then I'll add my ID, right? So when you're searching for these things in this Explore tab, you can set any series of filters that you want. So what you do is you go to filters here, and this is just a way of exploring other people's observations. You can set any series of filters if you want. If you only want to see observations that are already research grade, you can do that. If you only want to see things that haven't got an ID yet, you can do that. You can set to see only species that have some kind of conservation status, so near threatened or above. You can look for only introduced species. You can look for only ones that have sounds. The list goes on. You can look for observations that were observed on a specific date or in a specific month. And if you click this More Filters link here, it'll open up even more filters for you. So you can actually even search by different copywriting licenses. You can search for the date that your observation got added rather than observed. You can search things that were only seen by a particular person, things in a certain project. You name it, you can filter for it. But not everything is searchable by these filters, okay? So let's say I wanted to look in New South Wales, and I was interested in looking at New South Wales observations, and I was interested in looking at butterflies. Or I would type in New South Wales, and I would go to butterflies. And it's really simple, right? But let's say I wanted to look at all of Lepidoptera, so butterflies and moths. Again, that's really simple. I can just type in Lepidoptera, and I can see all of those from New South Wales as well. But what happens if I only want to see moths? We get a bit of a problem because moths aren't a monophyletic group. What I mean by that is you can't unite all the different moth superfamilies under one common group that doesn't also include the butterflies. So if you notice when I start typing, if I only want to see butterflies, then there's a group that's just for butterflies. But if I only want to see moths, there isn't a group that's just moths. I have to either pick butterflies and moths, or I have to pick one of the individual superfamilies, right? But I might only be interested in moths. I might not care about butterflies at all. There is a way to only search for moths, and that is by editing the URL. So you notice when you go to the URL up here, you notice there are all these numbers and all these symbols. And you can actually edit it really easily to completely manipulate your search and have way more filters than what are available just in this filters box. So it's a really cool thing to do. The first thing you need to know is what to exclude. So here, I want to exclude butterflies. So to do that, I need to figure out what the ID for butterflies is. So every single species, every family, genus, every group of organisms in iNaturalist is given a unique identifying number. So the way to find it is just to search for it. If I search for butterflies and I click About, you'll see there's a number at the top. That is the ID for butterflies. So 47,224 is the unique identifying number for butterflies. So what I do is I go back to my observation here. I go into the URL. I go to the end of the URL, and I type in the and symbol, without, underscore, taxon, underscore, ID equals, and then I copy that ID, and I search for that, and you'll notice now all the butterflies are gone. So I am now only looking at moths in New South Wales. I've completely excluded butterflies in New South Wales. And that's by editing that URL. Now you can do any kind of edit pretty much in that URL whatsoever. So as another example, let's say I'm really interested in looking at grasshoppers. Okay, I'm really interested in looking at grasshoppers in New South Wales. But I'm also interested in looking at scorpions. I really like those as well. But it's impossible, you would think at first, to look for both grasshoppers and scorpions simultaneously because they belong to different taxa. And there's no unique higher group that only contains grasshoppers or scorpions, right? If I wanted to look at both at the same time, I'd have to go all the way up to arthropods just to find the lowest common group that contains both of them. But again, I can do it by editing that URL. So what I do is I've brought up grasshoppers, and they have an ID of, you'll notice at the top, 700,600. So what I'll do is I'll go in my other tab, I'll look up scorpions, and I see that they have an ID of 48,894. So I'll copy that, and I'll go up to my URL. And this time what I do is I go to here, and I change taxon ID to taxon IDs because I'm trying to look at more than one thing at once. So I'll add that S. After the ID for grasshoppers, I'll add a comma, and then I'll paste in the ID for scorpions. I'll press enter. And I'm now looking at all the scorpions and all the grasshoppers for New South Wales. So now I'm looking at two pretty much unrelated groups of organisms at the same time. So is that clear enough for everyone how to do that? So it's editing the URL at the top. You can exclude groups that you normally wouldn't be able to without the filter. And you can look at multiple different groups that normally you wouldn't be able to because they're unrelated. So I could do this to look at birds and sea anemones at the same time. Or I could look at cyanobacteria and rhinoceroses at the same time. Whatever combination you want to make, it's possible, just as long as you know what that ID number is for that group. I can do the same thing for places. So let's say I simultaneously wanted to look at New South Wales scorpions as well as scorpions from Arizona. Then I would figure out what the ID is for Arizona. So I would go to Arizona, and I see that the place ID is 40. So then I would go to my URL, and I would change place ID to place IDs. So I'd add an S, and then I would add a comma here, and I would plug in 40, and then I would be seeing all the scorpions from both Arizona and New South Wales. Now, there are many, many ways of editing the URL, and there's a really nice forum post that has all the different ways you can do it. So I'm going to provide that link for you guys in the chat. So save that link. So that link shows you all the different ways that you can edit the URLs to do whatever search you like. So you can just see from the menu they've got, you can search for multiple taxa at once. You can search for observations that have no identifications. You can not only search within a box, but you can search within a circle. You can search by location or accuracy. So remember how I talked about you can set that accuracy circle to whatever you like? You can actually filter out observations that have a certain accuracy. So I might only want to look for observations that have an accuracy of 5 meters or under. I can do that by editing the URL. So there are many, many different things you can do by editing the URL, and they're all in this forum post here. The last thing I'll briefly talk about is how to identify things for other people. Now, a lot of the time when people make IDs for others, they'll do it by going to this Explore tab and typing in what they want. So let's say, so I usually make identifications for Australia. So I'll search for Australia. And the only way for me to make IDs here is to open things in new tabs. Right? I'll open that in the new tab. And then I'll click agree or add my ID, and then I close it and I go back. Or if I don't want to open things in new tabs, I have to click it and it'll open a new window. And then I make my ID, and then I have to go back. And it's a really, really long, arduous process. If you're making identifications for other people, don't use this window. The best window to use is identify. So if you want to help identify things and you want to have a look at other people's observations and help them figure out what they are, you use this identify tab. Now, at the moment, it's showing every single observation on iNaturalist. So what you can do is you set your filters as usual. So I'm going to set my filter to Australia. And then I'm going to set my filter to birds. And I'm now looking at all the bird observations from Australia. Okay. And what you'll notice straight away is this really handy agree button. So if you can tell what it is from the thumbnail, it's just a simple matter of clicking agree, and you make an identification in literally 1 second. Okay. But let's say, so for here, it was obvious, right? From the thumbnail, I can immediately see that's an emu, and I click agree, and my identification has been added immediately. But let's say it's something like this one, and I'm not super sure that that is a noisy firebird just from seeing this small photo. So what you do, just click the photo, and you've now got a big version. If you want to increase the magnification again, you just click it again. Okay. Now this one isn't that great because whoever took the photo, they've already cropped it, and so you can't zoom in that much further. We'll use this one as an example. So this one, yeah. So and then you just move your mouse around, and you can zoom in on whatever part you want. Now let's say you've got an observation like this, and it's quite underexposed, and it's really difficult to tell what the bird is because everything's dark. You can actually press this plus or minus under the sun here, and it will actually change the exposure of the photo for you. So you can brighten it up, or you can darken it, and that can help you make an ID. I just quickly got a question in the chat. So Vanessa said, how do you choose your region when uploading to the BioBlitz? Are there set regions? For example, I live in the southeast of South Australia. Do I just use the map function to upload my location? Yep, that's exactly what you do. So when you're first uploading your observation, you click in that little location bar, and you have that Google Maps window open. And wherever you took your photo, you just type in the location, and you figure out exactly where on the map it was. You click that point on the map, you set your accuracy circle, and then provided that you took that photo within a region that is actually competing in the BioBlitz, it will automatically be added to the project for you. So so let's say I'm in Greater Sydney and I've taken a photo. Well, Greater Sydney is one of the cities competing in the BioBlitz, so it'll be automatically added. But let's say I was out at Bathurst. So let's say I live in Sydney, but I'd gone for a trip out to Bathurst and taken a photo there, and Bathurst is not competing, so it won't get added. So, and Vanessa has the follow-up question, how do I know if my region is competing in the BioBlitz? So Stephen has said, yep, so the Southeast has no project. If you would like to set one up, you can contact him. But so in this case, you know that you don't have one. But if you wanted to check, if you are uncertain, what you want to do is go up to the search bar here on the main page. So yeah, so Margot's got a question I'll answer in 1 second. So if you wanted to search for the BioBlitz, go to here. Great Southern BioBlitz. No, that's not the one. I have a lot of projects, so it can take a long time to go through them. This is the one I wanted. Okay, so I'll post this link in the chat for you. So for anyone that's uncertain if the area they live in is competing in the BioBlitz, I'm going to post this link in the chat for you. Oh, Stephen's beating me to it. So he's just posted. Okay, and I've got another question to add as well. So, yeah, so pretty much you just look for this observation, and what you can do is you go to this map, and yeah, you pretty much just look at the map, and it can be a little convoluted to go through because there's a lot of overlapping areas. But you basically just got to try and find whether your area is in there yet. So you would zoom into your area, and you can see southeast corner of South Australia. There's nothing at the moment, right? But you can see city of Onkaparinga, Greater Adelaide, Lower Murray, Coorong. We go over to Victoria. You see Mallee Catchment and so on. So this is where you check whether your region is in there. So if your region is not here, you'll need to set up a project yourself. And as Stephen said in the chat, you can approach him. So you can either email him or you can message him on iNaturalist. His username is Stephen169, and we'll help you set up your project. I got two more questions. So Margot said, if it's for the BioBlitz, can people add to the project field? So by that, do you mean that can observations be in more than one project at once? Is that what you mean? So assuming that's what you mean, observations can be in as many projects. No, just like Australasian fishes. Yeah, you can. So your observation gets collected as part of the BioBlitz. You can also add it to Australian fishes if you like. That's completely fine. Observations can be in a million projects simultaneously. Like a lot of my observations I make, they're in 6, 7, 8 projects at the same time. But for any ones like Australasian fishes, you'll still have to add them manually to those ones. But it's just for the BioBlitz, it'll get automatically collected. And then we've had another question from Northern Branch, which I think is Bill Elder, who said, if we are only using checklists for our Great Southern BioBlitz and not taking photos, how do we add observations? Okay, so that's a really great question. One thing I will note, Stephen, are we accepting casual observations? I don't know if we had decided on that yet. So my answer will be contingent on that.
Yeah, sorry, I'll answer that. I'll come on to the chat. With casual observations, now we initially decided this is going to be an Australian thing a while ago. When we first, it's grown, and it's actually we've included places from around the world. Now each place, and including places within Australia, say for like Victoria, have various COVID restrictions. So what I think we will do is we will fully encourage people to make research grade or
casual.
But as far as casual goes, I think we'll try and avoid that, but they will be allowed to make them, if you know what I mean.
Because the checklist ones will all be casual because they won't have photos.
Yeah. So we will allow casual at the moment because of the various regions around the world. Some places are highly built up, and they have limited opportunity to make observations out in nature. But we will be encouraging people that rather than taking a picture of a pot plant, that you do endeavour to maybe have a look underneath the pot plant and take a picture of what's underneath there rather than the actual pot plant or a tree. Also, that people do tick the right setting when they're making a cultivated or captive observation,
yep.
As well as casual observations.
All right, so what I'll do is I'll explain that. So pretty much,
explain a bit closer.
Yeah. So the answer for Michelle said open the compost bin. That's always fun for everyone. There's a lot of good stuff in there. So yeah, to answer the Northern Branch question, so their question was, if we are only using checklists, i.e. they've got lists of birds, I assume they're observing, and they haven't got photos, how do we add observations? So great question. So if you let's say you've gone out on a bird watching trip and you observe 20 different bird species, and you were using your telescope or your binoculars, and you didn't take photos, you can still upload those observations. And the way to do that is you go to the upload screen as usual. I'll just remove this one to show you. And instead of clicking this big blue button that says choose files, you actually go to the top left up here where it says add. Okay, awesome. So you got checklists for birds, frogs, plants, reptiles. Awesome. Okay, so you got checklists for everything. So regardless of what it is, you've watched, you've been out in nature and you've recorded things and you haven't got photos, what you want to do is you go up to this top left button that says add, you click that, and then there's an observation, there's an option that says observation without media. And you click that, and that will then set up an observation for you that doesn't have a photo or a sound file. And the only annoying thing about it is that you'll have to manually add in the date and the location yourself. They won't be added for any of them because obviously when you upload a photo, it brings the date with it. So if you are uploading observations in this way, you will have to manually enter the date and the location. But keep in mind that trick I told you guys about. Let's say I'm doing multiple ones at the same time. Instead of having to type in the 25th of September over and over and over, you just make sure you select all of them and do it on the left-hand side here. And I can click the same date and it'll apply to all of them. Same thing for location. and then you just type in whatever you saw. The only thing that is, when this happens, keep in mind your observation will only be casual grade. So there are four main ways. So there are a heap of ways, but the four main ways that observations are treated as casual. One is that it doesn't have a photo or a sound file. So that will be casual. Another way is that it's missing the date. Another reason is that it's missing the location. And another reason is that you've taken a photo of a captive or cultivated organism. What I mean by captive or cultivated is something that is not wild. So if I take a photo of a pot plant in my garden, of a tree in a park that's been planted by the council, of a pet that I have, of an animal in a zoo, those are all considered captive or cultivated. And if you do take photos of something like that, you need to tick this captive cultivated box on the left-hand side, okay? And that means those observations will automatically be moved to casual grade. And I mean, casual grade, research grade, needs ID, they're all a bit arbitrary in terms of what they mean, because people can still use casual observations in research and they can still use the data. The only difference is that if your observation is casual, it won't be exported to external databases like the Atlas of Living Australia. So if for the Northern Branch, for you guys, if your members are making checklists and uploading observations based on those checklists and they don't have photos, they will go into iNaturalist. That's completely fine. And they'll be counted towards the project. That's completely fine. But just keep in mind those records won't be moved into the Atlas of Living Australia because they don't take casual records. So that's just something to keep in mind. And the same applies for going to the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, which is basically like the worldwide version of the Atlas of Living Australia. Only research grade observations go there. But yeah, pretty much if you want to add an observation where either you kept a checklist and you intentionally weren't taking photos, or let's say I was looking out the window of my house and I saw a bird fly past and I could identify it really easily, but it flew by so fast I had no chance to take a photo, then I can add an observation exactly in this way, but it will remain casual grade. So does that answer your question? Is that completely clear how to upload photos without media? Do keep in mind that if you are adding photos in this way, it's a little bit tiresome because you have to do it one at a time. So obviously, if I've taken 50 photos on my camera, I can select all 50 and then upload them all simultaneously. Whereas if I've gone out and taken a checklist of 50 different birds, I will have to click this observation without media button 50 times to add them all. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you are adding observations without a photo, it does take a lot longer for you to do than it would if you had a photo. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're doing that. Yeah, so I think that pretty much wraps everything up. If anyone has any more questions, wanted me to clarify anything I talked about, if you guys in the next few months, and I should say the next few weeks leading up to the BioBlitz, or indeed any time after the BioBlitz whatsoever, have any questions or you're unsure about something on iNaturalist and you need help, feel free to message me on the site at any time. My username is the Beachcomber. I'm pretty much on iNaturalist 24/7. So if you have any kind of question or you need help with something, I should be able to get onto it pretty quickly. So yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And I'll just open it just if anyone has any last minute questions or is unsure about something. No worries, Bill.
Feel free to unmute yourself and ask the questions, ladies and gents.
Thanks, Silvana and Marco. Appreciate it. Yeah, so I mean, ultimately, when you first start to use iNaturalist, a lot of the features can seem really daunting, and not everything is necessarily super intuitive. But the more you use the site, and the more you get used to it, and the more you upload things and identify things for people, it becomes a lot easier, and the site becomes quite friendly to use once you get used to it. And you realize not only friendly, but also really, really powerful. And one last thing I'll do, I'll provide one more link. And yeah, thank you again to Nanu, Jane, and Angela. For people that want to, say, produce books or some kind of output or little leaflet or newsletter to show their local council or their local naturalist group and talk about the successes of your BioBlitz, you can actually export all of the data. So there's a really nice tool that I'll post the link for you guys. There we go. So I will post this link in the chat. And then I've got another question as well. So Northern Branch asked, which is best to add scientific or common names? So you can add either. It's completely fine. So both will be accepted. So every single organism in iNaturalist has a scientific name without exception. A lot of them have common names, but not all. So if you type in, and keep in mind that a big issue with common names and the reason why scientific names exist is that common names are so variable around different parts of the world, and you can have 20 different common names for the exact same thing that people in different areas use. So you can type in the common name, that's completely fine. But if it doesn't appear, then you can type in the scientific name. But whichever one you type in, iNaturalist, as long as it's correct and you've spelt it correctly and that species exists, it will accept either the scientific or the common name. And whenever anyone else is viewing each observation, they'll see both. So they'll see both the scientific and the common name. In your profile, you can actually edit your settings to only see scientific names if you wish. A lot of people do that. But the default setting is that everyone will see both. So either one is fine. So I've just added in that link to the export tool. So basically what it does is, say you've had your 4 days of the BioBlitz and your city was really successful and you guys contributed like a few thousand observations and you'd had some support from your local council or from your local field naturalist club, and you want to put together a little newsletter summarizing everything you guys saw during the BioBlitz. You can go to this export page and you can go to this little bar here and you can type in your project name. And what that will do is it will pull all the data from your project, and then you go to all the way to the bottom and you can click create export, and that will actually create a CSV file for you that has all the data that was collected from your BioBlitz. And then you can analyze that afterwards and see which species were seen the most by all the people in your city, which users contributed the most, all that kind of thing. So this is just a really nice way of actually extracting the data from iNaturalist. Yeah, so unless there are any more last second questions, I think I'll probably wrap things up there and let people get on with their day or their night in whichever time zone you guys are. So yeah, again, I really appreciate you guys all tuning in. And as I said, if you have any questions whatsoever at any time, feel free to just message me on iNaturalist and hopefully I can help you guys out. I think we'll wrap things up, Stephen.
Thank you
worries,
so much,
Yeah,
Thomas.
Yes. Sorry, Michelle, you go.
I was just going to say thank you so much, Thomas. That was really informative. Virtual round of applause for Thomas, everyone. And Stephen, over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Thomas. As always, it's been a great little presentation. You've answered some pretty interesting questions, and as always, I think I've learned something. As always, something I didn't know, and your expertise is greatly appreciated, I'm sure, by everyone. And it's great to see people from around the world, actually. We've had some people from Africa join in, and I think possibly from South America as well, which is great. So I'll try and get this up and keep this recorded online, so other people who have missed it can listen in and benefit from your little presentation. So thanks, everyone. I think we'll wrap up here. And yeah, again, Thomas, thanks for your time.
All right. Thanks, guys.